Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to Love and Abuse. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. This is going to be a short episode. I wanted to record this really quick, but I wanted to read this as hopefully inspiration on what is possible, no matter what situation you're in, no matter how old you are, especially how old you are, because there are some relationships out there where you've been in them for a long time and you think, well, I'm just too old. I can't really do anything about it now, and so I'm just going to have to wait it out until it's over, or quite frankly, I'm dead. I don't really like when you think that way. I hope you don't think that way, but that's what some people do. They think that way. They think, this is it. I've made my bed. Now I'm going to sleep in it. And it doesn't matter if I'm happy. I'm just going to wait it out until it's over. That's a miserable existence. I don't want you to have a miserable existence. So I'm just going to read you this email and make some comments on it, and hope it is motivational for you. This person wrote, Dear Paul, I'm a 70-year-old man in a 50-year marriage to an emotional abuser. I listen to all of your podcasts, sometimes 2 and 3 times. I'm leaving this toxic relationship. I've finally hit the end. I knew she was abusive long ago, but I didn't have a name for it. Nobody cares to even acknowledge that men are abused as well. It's a silent scream because people don't think men are abused, only women. And nobody will give a man a sympathetic ear but a good therapist, which I have. I remember you said that you will finally leave when you're pushed so far that you just don't care. You don't care what your adult kids say or your friends or anybody. It's a matter of emotional life or death. Any advice from you would be so much appreciated. Paul, you're a godsend. Thank you for your work. Okay, thank you so much for writing this and sharing this. Thank you for your words. I'm glad the show has been helpful. And yes, you have quite a different experience ahead of you, because if you've been married for 50 years and you are leaving that marriage because of the abuse, you're going to have a lot of healing to do. You're going to have a lot of self-discovery that's going to happen. You're going to have a lot of reflection time. This is tough because 50 years of being exposed to behavior, it changes your mind. And I don't mean like, hey, you changed your mind, now you're doing something different. I mean, it rewires your brain to be exposed to something for that long. It rewires your brain in so many ways that you may not discover them all. You may leave with a lot of trauma, and because of that trauma, you may not think clearly for a while. You may have post-traumatic stress where you get triggered easily, or you are frightened off easily. These are could be things. These are maybe things. These aren't definite things. But I want you to be aware of them, just because you're leaving something that lasted so long that may have rewired, well, probably did rewire your brain in a lot of ways. Now, here's another angle, or 2 other angles, is that when you're in a relationship like this for this long, you may have turned off a lot of your connections throughout the years. And what I mean by that is sometimes the love stops. Sometimes you stop feeling anything toward the other person, and you just look forward to those moments that they're not in the room so you can enjoy some of your me time. And when you go through these periods of time, you get to connect with yourself, you get to rewire your brain, and you start to understand what life is like without them because you've turned off. And this is also an effect of the trauma. I mean, this can be an effect of the trauma, because when you're in such a highly traumatic or abusive situation, you can disconnect, you can dissociate, where you aren't in your own body. I'm speaking slightly metaphorically, but it is a disconnect from your senses. Dissociation is when you disconnect from the real world and you sink into your own world inside of you. And this protects you from the real world. So it is possible that if you're in a relationship that lasts this long, that has been this hurtful, then you could have been disconnecting, you could have been dissociating in such a way that has helped to protect you. So if you did this early on in the relationship and you were able to dissociate from the reality that you were living in and find a protected place inside yourself, you may have actually started some healing, even though that is a response to trauma, meaning you were still in the trauma, you were still suffering, but by being dissociated, it actually kept you from the reality of that suffering, if that makes sense. So if you have been disconnected from that reality, then you are going to have a different experience than some other people that just can't disconnect. I don't know if that happened to you. You didn't share that, but that happens a lot when you get to that point where you just can't take it anymore, so you sink inward. And it's almost like the gray rock technique, where you are just this dull, lifeless gray rock in the relationship when they're around. But when they're not around, you can reconnect with yourself. So that's possible. It is also possible that when you're not together, you're going to be able to crawl out of that protective area that you created inside of you and back to a reality that you're not familiar with, but you're going to appreciate and enjoy so much that the past will soon be forgotten. I know it's kind of hard to think about it that way, but it's amazing what happens when you are exposed to trauma and abuse for so long that when it suddenly goes away and you're exposed to a new reality without that stuff, how fast the old trauma can disappear. That doesn't mean you still won't maybe have some emotional triggers, but I've seen people change immediately when they're out of the trauma. They just switch. They go from being a victim to being empowered. And that empowerment also usually includes the words, "I will never do that again," or "I will never expose myself to that again." So this is also possible for you when you get out of an emotionally abusive relationship, where you suddenly switch and everything is brighter and lighter and feels better and you're happier, and it's like the old trauma never existed. You can remember it, but you're not attached to it. You don't have any feelings about it. And again, that usually happens when there's been some sort of disconnect or dissociation during the time when you were together. So there are people that are listening right now that might be going through that. You might be in a relationship right now where you are disconnected from the person so much that when they're around, you are basically not affected by them, even though you are, but you're protected from them as well in your own safe bubble, if I can call it that. But when they're not around, you free yourself from that bubble and enjoy life until they come back. I think my mom was like that, actually. My mom was married to an abusive alcoholic for a good 40 years, so just 10 years under this person. And when he wasn't around, she was happy. She enjoyed life. She had future worries about him coming back, but she never focused on that. She just was very present in enjoying herself while he wasn't around. So she found ways to find comfort and happiness when he wasn't around. And then when he was around, of course, she felt very unpleasant. She felt very uncomfortable, and she was definitely suffering, but she found ways to avoid him both physically and mentally, and just did what she can to get through the moment to get to the next moment when he wasn't around. So I've seen this too. I'm just sharing this with you just in case you're in this space and you're thinking, what am I going to do when I get out of this relationship? I have all this emotional baggage. Sometimes it goes away immediately. And when it does, you can move on and be okay. I think people who have been in longer relationships that they've suffered in, they're capable of moving on unless it was just torture or the suffering was not something you could escape. So this is a third angle to this, is that if you were in a constant cycle of abuse over and over again, whether it's emotional, mental, physical, or something else, and you couldn't get away from it, and even if you dissociated and disconnected from the world, you still suffered because maybe you brought that suffering into your protected place, which made your protected place an unsafe place to be as well. That total exposure, or what I like to call relationship radiation, was impossible from which to escape. So when you are near someone that gives off so much of that toxicity, and it's impossible to not be exposed to it, this is something that can linger even after the relationship ends, because you are just so traumatized. And I don't mean to give you bad news if this is you, but the good news is when you remove radioactive elements from your life, when they are farther away, you stop getting irradiated. In other words, you stop suffering. You have to heal. The relationship radiation had an effect on you, so you do have to heal, which means you have to relearn how to think. You have to relearn what it feels like to be comfortable and safe and even happy. And you have to learn to find love in yourself, from yourself. You have to find compassion for yourself, from yourself. You have to find respect and kindness and everything I talk about on this show from yourself. Self-nurturing to the point where you realize that you don't have to rely on anyone else for those things, that you might have relied on other people for those things for so long. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get those things from other people. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have anyone else in your life ever. It just means you let go of your attachment or your dependency on seeking these things from other people, so that you don't become attached to the wrong people. Because you can find happiness from other people. They can be a source of happiness. But when it comes with toxic behavior, I don't believe that happiness is worth seeking from those who are toxic, because of the mixture. The mixture of toxic behavior and kind behavior, or seemingly kind behavior, is what creates a traumatic bond. And trauma bonding is when you start to think that love also comes with suffering. And that's just not true. Love doesn't come with suffering. It's not part of it. It's a separate thing. It's the opposite. So when you are suffering from someone else's bad behavior toward you or hurtful behavior toward you, that is not coming from a place of love. That is not what love means. Love is when someone supports your happiness. They are happy that you're happy. They care about you feeling good. They are hurt when you are hurt. That's empathy. That's compassion. That is what a relationship is about. When you care about the person that you're with and hate the fact that you might have hurt them or made them cry, that is love. But love is definitely not an intentional hurting or seeing someone in pain or suffering, knowing that you are causing it and not stopping. That doesn't come from a place of love, even though it may feel that way. I mean, there are some people that do behavior that is hurtful, and they know they're doing it, and they still love the person. But they have also experienced some sort of trauma in their life that makes them think that controlling someone, manipulating them, and being emotionally abusive is part of loving them. And to be blunt, it's not. It's a false belief. Loving someone doesn't mean wanting them to feel pain or guilt or shame or embarrassment or humiliation. It's none of that. Loving someone is caring about someone's well-being so much that if they are unwell or unhappy or sad, especially from something that you did, if they are any of those things, then you become sad, you become unwell, because it hurts you to see them hurt. And I know there are people that listen to the show that are on that side. I know there are people that are wanting to change their behavior. They're listening to a show like this, looking for ways to change their behavior toward those they love. And if that is you, I want you to head over to the website healedbeing.com and sign up for the email list over there, because I'm sending you tools and resources to help emotionally abusive people that want to change. So if that's you, if you're listening to this and that's you, head over to healedbeing.com. But for anyone else that might be on the victim side of the equation here, if you're not experiencing someone who cares about your well-being and is sad when you're sad and wants you to be healthy and well and supports you being happy, even if they disagree with your choices, then you have to be really careful if there's any type of toxicity coming from them, because that could be something that just doesn't stop. For this person who wrote, it didn't stop for 50 years. And I didn't know I was going to get into all this today, but one of the main reasons I wanted to read this email is because he's 70 years old. I mean, if you think you're too old, you're not. You could be 90 and have experienced what this person's experienced and finally make the choice that's right for you. I don't come on the show and promote divorce. I don't come on here and promote breaking up. I want you to make empowered decisions that are right for you, that work for you. Because I don't know your situation and nobody else knows your situation but you and other people that are directly involved. So I want you to make decisions that work for you and that you feel empowered to make, so that when you make them, you can look back and say, yes, I did this. I made this decision. This is what I needed to do. And that builds your foundation. That builds emotional and mental strength that you need to make decisions going forward. Your path may be to get away from a toxic person. It may be to separate for a while so you get some clarity. You may need some time to reflect. You may need some time for the fog to clear and lift so you can think clearly and straight and healthy. Because when you're around toxic components, you can't think clearly. You're more on survival mode. You are more in your primal state of being, which is the lowest level on the pyramid of getting oxygen and breathing and eating and sheltering. And you don't want to live life from that place. You want to move toward thriving instead of just surviving. And I want you to be there too. So to the person who wrote this message, you asked if I had any advice for you. And I think my only advice is to let you know that when you get out of this situation, you may have to relearn who you are, or learn from scratch who you are without this person in your life. And when you do that, you may find it's a lot easier than you think. No matter how much trauma you've been in, you'll find it's a lot easier to learn who you are and reconnect with yourself in this new way without somebody else in your life when the toxic element is removed. It's a new chance of self-discovery. And there are many things that you're going to have to get used to, but I know you will, because what happens is that when you're in the relationship, you're often in a fear-based state. When the fear is gone, who are you? I think that's a great question. When the fear is gone, when you're no longer fearing a day-to-day existence, who are you? Who are you without the fear? That's exciting to me. I know it's scary, but it's exciting to me to think that you could be in a life without fear. At least when it comes to the relationship. There are other things to fear, of course, but nothing like the proximity of the toxicity that you've experienced for 50 years. Once that is gone from your life, you get to think clearly, probably for the first time. If you're 70, that means you got married when you were 20. When you were 20, you were still a child. I mean, when I was 20, I was still a child. Men are often children longer than women. I might be wrong in some cases, but for the most part, that's what happens. So getting married at 20, very young age, still getting to know yourself and settling down quite quickly before you've reached a level of, maturity or age where you've stopped experimenting and pushing the boundaries, because when we're young, that's what we do. We don't typically settle down that fast. So you're going to have an entirely new life. And don't worry about how many years you have left, because Isn't it worth the fog lifting, the proximity to that toxicity going away, just to start experiencing something new, something fresh, something worth doing every day, no matter how much time you have left, because you'll become so focused on what you have right in front of you every day. And that's what I think is going to happen for you. I think you're going to be okay. I think you're going to be just fine. And before I close the show, you also said something that nobody cares to even acknowledge, that men are abused as well. I think a lot of the times men aren't usually the ones that stand up and say, hey, I'm being abused. I see it more often because I have a show like this. I talk about this stuff. A lot of men reach out to me. A lot of men have taken the assessment in the MEAN workbook, and sometimes they discover for the first time that they're being abused. I think a lot of men are also taught not to be afraid and not to cry and not to even show their emotions. And it's just a terrible thing. Men, you need to be connected to your emotions. That is most of the human experience. So if you are listening and you were taught not to cry, not to connect with your emotions, not to show fear, not to show any vulnerability, I'm here to say that you can absolutely do that. And if you don't believe me, listen to past episodes of my show. Listen to The Overwhelmed Brain, because I have been more transparent on both of these shows, and my transparency is my strength. My vulnerability is my security. It makes me feel stronger. It makes me feel freer. It connects me with myself. It connects me with others. It allows me to be more compassionate and caring, and frees me from what I've been repressing, because that's what a lot of men do, and a lot of women too. They repress what's going on. They stuff it down. They are afraid to talk about it because it might make them look weak. And I don't care if you're a man or a woman or a transgender or whoever you are, however you identify yourself, we all have the capability of repressing what's going on inside of us. And if you've ever listened to my episode on depression, I define depression as repressing what you think and suppressing what you feel. That's what leads to depression. If you want to stay out of depression, or at least avoid depression, don't repress what you think. Don't suppress what you feel. You can't always do that with everyone. I understand that. You can't always feel safe to express yourself and vent toward other people because they use it against you. This is what this show is all about. One aspect of emotional abuse is when someone takes what you share with them and uses what you shared against you. So that can be tough. If you are with someone who is using what you're sharing and using your kindness and compassion and love against you, then you need to consider that a toxic component of your life and make new decisions for yourself. Does that mean leaving? It may or may not be. Does that mean expressing to them that you want that behavior to stop? It could be. Does it mean getting help? Does it mean therapy? It could mean a number of things. I think the most important thing is to express what's going on inside of you and find out if the other person cares enough to stop the behavior. A person who cares enough to stop the behavior is going to do anything they can to stop it, because there are some very good people out there doing some very bad behavior, and they know it. There are people that listen to this show that write to me and say, look, I'm one of those people. I'm an emotionally abusive person. And when I hear from them, I know they're working on it. Emotional abuse is a behavior, but doesn't necessarily define the person as a whole. Sometimes people need to learn that their behavior is not healthy. And when they do, they also need to heal from doing that behavior. They need to stop doing that behavior, but they don't necessarily know how because they don't have the resources. Again, go to healedbeing.com if that's you. But for anyone else listening, I want you to keep your power. That is my ultimate goal with this show. You need to keep your power. And if you've tried everything to do that and your power keeps getting stripped away or taken away, then you need to do what you can to get that power back. And that goes into a number of other things we can talk about, but I'm going to end the show here. I think this is what I wanted to convey today. I'm sure there's a lot more we can talk about on this subject, but I wanted to get this out there to you. I wanted to address this message that came in, and I hope that this has been helpful, and I want the very best for you. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook provides an evaluation of your relationship based on a 200-point assessment. It is geared toward romantic relationships, but many have used it to determine if family or others in their life are being manipulative or emotionally abusive as well. If you're in a difficult relationship and would like to pinpoint the unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad, let the workbook help you discover the specific components of bad behavior and put into words what you're experiencing. Get the tools you need to help you reach clarity. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant because you are. Thanks again for joining me. We'll talk again soon.